Lewis Powell ditched his horse and then he hid in the cemetery for 3 days. So John Wilkes Booth is going to shoot Lincoln. And then you had George Azer, whatever, that German was supposed to kill Johnson. And then you had Lewis Powell. And Lewis Powell, maybe he's a Confederate, he's a piece of shit. I can't stand the motherfucker. But I can't seem to hate him as much as I hate the other motherfuckers. Lewis Powell was a Confederate soldier. He was drafted into the Confederacy. And then they just had these battles where they just made him a fucking formidable fucking killing fucking force. So after you've been to Gettysburg, after you fought major battles and you've seen lots of people die, you know, shooting the leadership, Lewis Powell, he ditched his horse and hid in the cemetery for 3 days. It probably made sense for Lewis Powell. I mean, why shoot all these other poor bastards out here in the field? It's not us. They didn't choose to be out in the field. It's their commanders. It's their officers. It's their government drafting them. When that World War I where they all just sung Feliz Navidad or something. And then sung Kumbaya, held hands and sung Kumbaya. Is that what you expect? Huh? So after John Wilkes Booth killed Abraham Lincoln, shot him with a one-shot gun. Talk about an Eminem one shot. This is your one moment. It's not 3 minutes. It's not fucking battle. You know, it's he literally had one bullet in his gun. So that is crazy. What I want to explore, there was a little bit of a conspiracy. And in Colorado law, conspiracy used to be just, you know, you conspired with other people in order to do the damn thing. Now it's like, you know, a cuss word, conspiracy theory. So that's the first thing I'm going to say about the Lincoln assassination was that there was a little conspiracy. How big does it go? How big? We haven't got any of the Jesuits or the Vatican or any, you know, the Bilderberg group, if Freemasons. None of them people are like really connected. The banks, I think the banks, the London banks, that's interesting, right? I would rather follow the banks. But there's a little conspiracy in the sense of, let's presume that, you know, mostly, I'll even give you that, you know, John Wilkes Booth, most of the fucking time, you know, lone nut, fucking did the job. There's actually a lot of lone nuts that get the job done. At least the official version of all the presidents, right? JFK was killed by a lone nut. Lincoln was killed by a lone nut. Garfield was killed by a lone nut. McKinley was killed by a lone nut. How can a lone nut get so goddamn close to the president? Now, it's possible that one person could just lose their shit. Teddy Roosevelt got shot. Teddy Roosevelt got shot while he was giving a campaign speech, and then he continues to give a campaign speech. But before he continued the speech, he says, "Bring that man up here." And he looked at the man and he says, "Why'd you do it? Why'd you shoot me? Why'd you do it?" And the man didn't have an explanation. He didn't have an explanation. And then Teddy Roosevelt was like, "Get him out of my sight. Just get him out of my sight. Get him out of my sight. Back to the future. Back to the future." Right? Right? In the theater. Right? This would be like 3D. Hey, no, you son of a... You right there, you son of a bitch. Now, you got to stop talking. You stop talking, and then you over there. So, Robert Kennedy, I'm going to compare every single one of the assassinations with the Lincoln assassination. Because for the most part, Lincoln was killed by a lone nut. He was killed by a lone nut with one bullet, one gun, one bullet, and one fucking knife. What's crazy about that, though, was that U.S. Grant was supposed to be at that fucking theater. Edwin Stanton said he didn't want to do anything with the theater project. He didn't want to provide security for the theater project. There was like 50 bodyguards, random-ass bodyguards, sometimes the D.C. police, the Metropolitan. That's who it was. John Frederick Parker was supposed to be sitting there. So you got Edwin Stanton, who wasn't bodyguarding. You had U.S. Grant, who was going to go, but then he changed his mind at the last moment. And then when John Wilkes Booth shows up to Abraham Lincoln's booth, there's nobody protecting him. John Parker, the Metropolitan D.C. police officer, went to the tavern and was drinking. And they were drinking at the same saloon. So it's very much possible that John Frederick Parker, the guy who was supposed to be a bodyguard for Lincoln, talked to John Wilkes Booth in the tavern. Did they talk knowing each other? Did they did they just bump into each other? Did they drink in the tavern without even running into each other? That's a possibility. Or maybe John Wilkes Booth gave him some money. And then where the hell's he getting some money? He was like a Confederate courier and spy. So he was getting some money from some people, right? The banks. I think the banks would be an interesting follow-up. But what I'm saying is this. There's always a little bit of a conspiracy. There's always a little bit of a conspiracy. So with our Abraham Lincoln thing here, what was a little conspiracy? Well, John Wilkes Booth, right? One man, one gun, one bullet, one fucking knife. Did the job. John Wilkes Booth, though, he had several accomplices. There were supposed to be two other assassins. One gets cold feet, and that guy that gets cold feet, he gets hung. He gets hung. If there's an innocent person, because Lewis Powell is going to say on the hanging barracks and the hanging fucking wooden contraption, the hanging machine, Lewis Powell's going to shout that Mary Surratt had nothing to do with it, but Mary Surratt was part of the conspiracy. John Wilkes Booth is going to go to Mary Surratt's boarding house, the bar and hotel. So John Wilkes Booth is going to go to Mary Surratt's bar and hotel, and then so is Lewis Powell. 3 days he hides in the cemetery. So you had three different assassins, right? You had George Atzerodt. So I'm just telling you, there was a little bit of a conspiracy. Was it the fucking Vatican? Was it the fucking Jesuits? Was it the goddamn Freemasons? I don't know. But on the surface of it, there's a conspiracy. John Wilkes Booth had friends. He had money. When he said he was going to do some evil shit, nobody told him no. Nobody said that could be a terrible fucking thing for the... But John Wilkes Booth had an ego. He was an actor. So that's like Tom Hanks just being all pissed off at goddamn Joe Biden, right? Tom Hanks is the star of this show. No, Tom Hanks is the star of this movie. Tom Hanks is the star of this American movie. Who the hell is this Joe Biden? So John Wilkes Booth, for whatever reason, maybe he was a white supremacist, the cause of what? States' rights. He's a racist bastard piece of shit. He believed in slavery, wanted to maintain slavery. And Lee had just lost. Lee surrendered. There was like 3 or 4 major fucking losses right before this happened. And once Lee surrendered, it was almost like, well, shit, it seems like it's almost all gone. And then Jefferson Davis is going to hold out for a little bit longer. So John Wilkes Booth, a lot of people say, well, you know, he wanted to mess up the Union, but really he did a lot. He put Andrew Johnson became the president. Andrew Johnson was a Union Democrat, which means he's basically, you know, just a hop, skip, and a jump from being a Confederate himself. So John Wilkes Booth, if they would have taken out the 3 fucking guys, so I guess that's Lewis Powell was trying to take out Seward, William Seward. He attacks the shit out of Seward. Seward's the Secretary of State, which doesn't make sense because you had 3 assassins and they're going to go after the vice president and the president, which makes sense. But then the Secretary of State, no, you want to go after the fucking Colfax, right? Colfax was the Speaker of the House. If you're trying to take America out, then what John Wilkes Booth, that's what we're told is John Wilkes Booth conspiracy was he was trying to wipe America out. Well, you got to take out the line of secession. It's the president, then the vice president, and then it would be the Speaker of the House. So it doesn't make any sense that Lewis Powell was sent to Seward's house. So a lot of people say it could have been Edwin Stanton. It could have been, you know, conspiracy. There was another fucking senator that said, oh my God, if this shit gets out, then we're all fucking ruined. So there's a lot of, you know, crazy shit that happens. But I will, for the most part, say that a lone gunman could fucking snap and say, you know what, that damn James Garfield didn't give fucking Charles Guiteau, a job. And Charles Guiteau was the stalwart of stalwarts. He was the most loyal of the most loyal. He was the most loyal of the loyal, James Garfield. Why didn't you give Charles Guiteau a goddamn job? So Charles Guiteau was pissed off about not getting a job, and that does suck. If you're a stalwart, you're the big loyal fucking person, and you help these people get elected, you like a job, right? Some patronage, but that's also a little bit corrupt now, isn't it? So my point being, though, he was a lone gunman. He was a lone gunman, and he was able to get to the president of the United States and shot him in the back and killed him. Shot him in the back, too, right? Fucking coward. Like a fucking coward. And James Garfield, like, there's no good reason. There's no, like, political reason. It's just a personal reason. He didn't get a fucking job. And really, you know, if you didn't get the job the first time, try again, right? Jesus Christ, what the fuck? I mean, were you that loyal? Man, I was the most loyal of the loyal. Were you? Because if you were Job, then no matter what goddamn shit God does, you gotta fucking take it. Apparently you weren't the most loyal of the loyal. Apparently you got a little bit of a God complex too. You got a bit of an ego yourself. Now, McKinley, Garfield, JFK, they were all essentially shot by lone gunmen, but there was a small conspiracy. You had Mary Surratt, you had Lewis Powell, you had that George Atzerodt, and then they had the escape. And there was a lot of people. One guy just holds John Wilkes Booth's horse. He just holds John Wilkes Booth's horse. And then he gets arrested and has to spend like 3, 5, 6 years in jail or some shit. So I got some notes here about Robert Kennedy, right? You had other assassinations, RFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton. And we know a lot of the fucking details of this stuff. So I feel like use Abraham Lincoln's assassination. We need the truth. And you need a control. And so you need something to compare all these other assassinations to. And so Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth, a lone gunman for the most part, but there was a little conspiracy. So not only did you have two other assassins, Lewis Powell was supposed to kill Seward, and that George Atzerodt was supposed to kill fucking, Atzerodt or whatever, supposed to kill Andrew Johnson. John Wilkes Booth had a guy hold his horse. John Wilkes Booth found out information about what the fuck was going on. When he shows up to the door, he thought he was going to have to fight both Grant and actually that doesn't make sense. If he had one bullet, it's almost like John Wilkes Booth knew that the booth wasn't going to be guarded. Or maybe he walked past, because he was in that theater often, so maybe he walked past the booth and saw that nobody was guarding it. Or maybe the fucking, Jesuits paid somebody, or the goddamn Vatican, or Freemason, a little birdie whispered in somebody's ear. And so there's a little conspiracy there. Now, the bigger conspiracy is his runaway. John Wilkes Booth doesn't get arrested, and he's going to get executed. At least we're told he gets executed 11 days later. Now, the reason why I say it like that, because there's two things. I once heard that John Wilkes Booth had a left-handed gun and he was right-handed, or vice versa, something to that effect. He was right-handed, left-handed gun, or the other way around. So why would you, if you're a right-hander, why would you have a left-handed gun? That doesn't make sense. Could a right-handed person have a left-handed gun? Sure, but it's still a fucking weird coincidence. That's a weird fucking thing. It's also weird that John Wilkes Booth went to Lincoln when he was at the theater and there was nobody protecting him, and then he's going to jump into the middle of the theater and then he's going to shout out with the fucking bloodied blade in the air, Sic Semper Tyrannis, and that the South has been avenged. And he broke his leg, falling on the fucking thing when he jumped off the balcony. That Henry Rathbone, somebody did fight back. So not Mary Todd. Mary Todd didn't fight back, and neither did Henry Rathbone's wife. But Henry Rathbone fought back, and he wound up getting stabbed. And so when John Wilkes Booth had a bloody knife, it was Henry Rathbone's blood that was on the knife, not Abraham Lincoln's. Abraham Lincoln was pretty much killed right away. As soon as he got the bullet right behind the left ear, and the bullet goes through his brain and then lodged right in the front of his head, he slumped over immediately. And then they essentially said he was a goner, but they didn't call it, officially until 7:22 a.m. And I don't know if they're just saying vitality, it's just the president, his neurotransmitters just kept firing. Like, no, I got so much work, and the brain was trying to fix itself or something. Because it seems to me that you shoot somebody in the back of the head and they slump over, they're dead right then and there. They're not coming back. I don't know. They said that he was still breathing though, and that a doctor had scraped out some coagulated. It was scabbing. The scar, I guess, in the back there was bleeding out, and then it had coagulated, but it was building up pressure. There was just so much pressure, I guess, of all the fucking brain or whatever, that he had scraped it out, and then it released, and then it said that it helped Lincoln's breathing. But it's also kind of like, shit, should you have fucking, isn't that blood, and did brains fucking come out? What the fuck was, I don't know. His breathing was, and then I guess slowly but surely, like at 7 a.m. the next day, April 14th, April 15th, 1865, his breathing is getting slower and slower, and then it stopped, and then it resumed, and then he didn't breathe anymore. So I guess he did kind of hang on. It feels like to me that it'd be propaganda. And then President Abraham Lincoln, he even got shot in the head, but he still pressed on. And in a way, I guess he did. He was still breathing. He was still fucking breathing. And it makes me think that with modern fucking medicine, he might have fucking survived it. And that's Charles Guiteau. James Garfield gets shot in the back, but his fucking doctors... God, there was another one, Cherries. That one fucking Taylor... One that Taylor from Louisville, that motherfucker, he ate a bowl of cherries and they said that killed him or whatever. So there was like 2 presidents that died of poisoning and people suggest that they were murdered, which that's very possible. They're the president, so they would have, enemies galore. Especially if they're like popular and activists and they're, making lots of changes. So the other part of the little conspiracy of John Wilkes Booth is that he ran away. And it took like 11, 12 days to eventually capture him. He goes to a barn. But he ran away. There was one guy holding his fucking horse. And then he runs to one place and another place. And he meets up with David Harold. So they had a rendezvous point. And then they get in the river. And they actually go back to Maryland or Virginia. I forget, one of them was like safe and the other one wasn't. And then once they get to Virginia, they got Dr. Samuel Mudd. Dr. Samuel Mudd set fucking John Wilkes Booth his leg. And he ran into 1 or 2 other fucking people before he got to Samuel Mudd. So there was a lot of fucking people that was helping John Wilkes Booth out. So, you could have a Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau is a lone, nut. But did he have a buddy or a friend that he was appealing to? Were there some bankers involved? It's, why did Garfield have such lax fucking security that day? And we're all guilty of doing the good that we didn't do. We all could do a lot more good. And so we're all guilty of doing the good that we didn't do. So everybody could have done better that day that Lincoln was shot and killed. Or Garfield. So Charles Guiteau is, wrestled down and arrested. But John Wilkes Booth is able to live for another 11 days. Last thing I'll mention, because this is all about May something, is that John Wilkes Booth is in the barn and he doesn't come out. David Harold comes out. John Wilkes Booth is going to stay inside the barn. So I was going to say something, but I'm forgetting it. Let's see if I can bring it back. Bring it back. Because I was comparing and contrasting that Garfield, right? Guiteau, what happened to Guiteau? He was arrested immediately, but John Wilkes Booth got to live for another 11 to 12 days. And so the last thing I want to mention is that when John Wilkes Booth kills Lincoln and he jumps in front of the theater and he breaks his leg or, stumbles or what the fuck ever, injures his leg, and then he holds the knife up and sic semper tyrannis, and then he runs off into the side door and goes into the back alley where there's a fucking horse, man waiting with a horse, holding the horse, and then he takes the horse and he runs. And then he talks to a whole bunch of fucking people. I totally believe everything that happened with him and shooting Lincoln at the theater. I very much am skeptical. There seems to be like this weird shadow, this weird skeptical doubt over how John Wilkes Booth was captured. But we've had like 20 people, 19 out of 20 people said that it was John Wilkes Booth's body, people that knew him. There's only one person that said it wasn't his body. He got shot through the fucking thing, and he actually lived for a day or two, so it wasn't like he got shot. He got shot in the neck, and it severed his vertebrae, and he went paralyzed. And then it took a day or two before eventually he looked at his hands, and he said, useless, useless. And then he died. He asked somebody to lift his hands up. He got shot through the fucking, through the spine, through the spinal cord. So don't think that you're going to take a bite out of the universe without the universe taking a bite out of you. My point is that I don't know what happened at the barn. 12 days later, he gets killed one day, or he gets shot one day and then he dies the next day. I don't know the extent of it. They're burning the barn down. David Harold leaves. He's still in there. The cop said that he raised his gun up or whatever. Yeah, I'm sure. He killed the president, so it's almost like, who gives a shit if he raised the gun up or not. But he did say he was going to stay in the fucking barn and he was going to fight it out. He probably could have been arrested peacefully. His orders were to arrest him peacefully. And maybe because he's got information. Who the fuck is he? He did have a diary. Edwin Stanton had his diary. And then 18 pages of his diary was removed. And then that one senator did say, oh my God, if this gets out. So, there was a scene in JFK that was saying, okay, you think it was the mob that did it, but, who could have done this thing and that thing and all these big fucking time things? Who could have made sure that Lincoln was by himself at that theater? Who could have made sure that the security guard wasn't sitting right outside of the damn booth? Who could have made sure that John Wilkes Booth could have got to safety? Is it the mob? Maybe there's and here's another thing to consider. Kissinger kind of fucking acted like, just because other random crazy ass people did shit that makes our policy better in terms of Chile. Nixon and Kissinger, they pretend they didn't assassinate Salvador Allende. They pretend they had nothing to do with it and that it just had to do with the fascists of their own country. The fascists of their own country went to go kill Salvador Allende, and then Allende committed suicide before they could capture him. He committed suicide. We're supposed to believe that basically they are just making Allende seem like such a bitch-ass piece of shit. He killed himself before he got arrested or whatever. Motherfucker, why wouldn't he go down shooting? And it sounds to me like you fucking murdered him and then you just said all this other shit. You made up all this other dumb shit. But Kissinger had said, we're supposed to pretend that we're not happy that Allende was removed from power, but even though it's consistent with our policies. So the policies of America is you have to be a capitalist and you have to be for democracy. You got to have elections and you got to have free market principles. You can't elect a socialist. You can't elect a communist. That's not allowed. But that's democracy. We can't get into that. My point being, though, Kissinger acted like, let's presume none of the senators, Edwin Stanton, Colfax, the Speaker of the House, none of the damn people. Andrew Johnson was one that, was benefiting the most. He became the fucking president afterwards. So, and hell, maybe maybe that was the fucking point. But then if that was the point, why'd they send George Atzerodt over there? Because that makes more sense. But I was going to say something. I keep saying there's one more thing. There's one more thing. One last thing that I want to mention. I guess I'll just end it off on that. Oh, no, Edwin Stanton. So what I was trying to say is that maybe Edwin Stanton, he said he didn't want any of the goddamn security detail on the fucking theater project. So that makes it sound like he didn't provide security, not because he was against Lincoln, but because he didn't support Lincoln going out into the fucking public and going to theater. And so the way he had rebelled or protested was, well, then I'm not going to provide you security. Fine, you want to fucking get out and mingle amongst the masses? I'm not going to provide you security. You can go out and mingle amongst the masses, but I'm not going to provide you security. So is it possible that, these senators and fucking cabinet people, because of rote jealousy and just kind of, they didn't do anything, but they kind of opened the doorway. They kind of had a cold shoulder. They showed a cold shoulder to one of his policies, and then that cold shoulder wound up opening the door for John Wilkes Booth too. So that's the extent of what I'm going to talk about with Lincoln, because I don't want to get into the big conspiracies. It would be fascinating to learn that Pope John Paul or some fucking person, the goddamn, maybe it was the King of England, maybe the King of France or something. Who knows, So, where we at now? I have a whole bunch of notes. I'll just read some notes here. I got 5 more minutes. And the purpose of this is to compare and contrast. Eventually, I'm going to talk about RFK. RFK got assassinated by Sirhan Sirhan. And we're told that because he wanted, to send fighter planes to Israel. And it kind of seems right. That kind of seems like that would make sense. The Israel and Palestine has been at it ever since, and it sucks. We still have problems with Israel and Palestine today. So if RFK was on the side of, Israel, slam dunk, not going to recognize Palestine in the least bit, that could have pissed off a Palestinian American, Sirhan Sirhan, to go and shoot RFK. But to compare and contrast with, could Sirhan Sirhan been by himself? Yeah. A lone gunman can go up there, but somebody liked him. Somebody was his friend. He had a bank account. He had a job. He had a home. He had an address. He had some people. So there's always a little conspiracy behind. He bought the gun from somebody. There's always a little conspiracy. There's always a little conspiracy. So to assume that it's just one fucking, I think we actually got, most of the time I could say that there's a lone gunman, but all your lone gunmen's got a little conspiracy behind them. And I think it's important, in order to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, is to try to figure out that conspiracy. So let's see. Let's go over some notes here. We'll just do this first page and then come back. With a vengeance, a menace with a vengeance. Gonna support the citizens and give the politicians some apprehensions. Okay, so let's see here. John Wilkes Booth. He was killed by Sergeant Boston Corbett. He was shot and killed in a barn with a Colt revolver. Jefferson Davis had spies. The Confederate, it was a war. So to think that, there wasn't some kind of network that he was a part of course, John Wilkes Booth was a part of some sort of Confederate network. He was a courier and a spy. He passed packages along and passed them back and forth. So there's 8 co-conspirators who were caught and found guilty by a military court. 4 of them are going to get hung. So a military court is going to catch 8 co-conspirators. So there's a little conspiracy. It wasn't just John Wilkes Booth. Mary Surratt, she is said to be the first woman ever killed by the U.S. government. By hanging, right? By the judicial branch, or however you want to put it. First one to be executed by the U.S. government. And rightfully so. Powell said, oh, it wasn't her, it was her. And then David Harold took Powell to go, he stabbed the shit out of Seward. Seward was up, he had an injury, he fell, and he had this metal contraption. He was about to die anyways. William Seward was up in his room, and he had this metal contraption onto him. Lewis Powell knocks on the door, and he says, I'm here for some medicine. I got medicine for Seward. And I'll just finish it off with that. So you had medicine for Seward. And then they go, oh, it was the fucking servant. The servant? So they got black servants, like... we're trying to liberate black folks. Why would you still keep black people enslaved? Botham Goose. So they got a servant of William Seward, answers the door. And then the servant starts yelling after Lewis Powell rushes in. He says, I got this medicine, and I need to go in there, and I need to show him how to take the medicine, which I guess that's how doctors do. But back in the Civil War, if you went to the hospital, you were pretty much a goner. I saw a whole pile of just amputated feet. Whole pile of amputated feet. So if you were to go to the hospital, you were a goner. Anyways, he had medicine and was going to show him how to do it. And they was like, no, just hand me to it. The fucking son of Seward, I want to say Frederick Seward. He had 2 or 3 of his sons. And he said, no, just hand me the medicine. And then the guy's like, oh, okay, I'll hand you the medicine. And then Lewis Powell, he got in the door, right? He was able to rush into the door. And he was still talking about the medicine. No, I got to give him this medicine. I have to give him the medicine. Okay, I'll give him the medicine. And you show me how to do it, and I'll show him. And then he was mad about that, Lewis Powell was, so he acted like he was going to walk away, pulls his gun, and then puts it right to his chest. I've heard both his head and his chest. And he pulls the trigger. Misfire. That's how close, Frederick Seward came to dying. Nobody's going to die, but he's going to stab the shit out of everybody. And he gets on top of William Seward, and he's just stabbing the crap out of him, and he was able to stab his face. And he thought he got him. He thought he got his neck or got his brain or something, but no, he just clipped his cheek, and his cheek is just falling off. And because of that metal contraption, he was in a carriage, a horse and carriage, and the horses freak out, and then he falls off. And he fell off, and that accident somehow fucked his fucking head and face up. But because he had that metal contraption on his face, Lewis Powell, when he was trying to stab him, couldn't stab him because the metal kept on getting in his way, and then he's kind of fighting back. And then later on, he's going to testify, and the only thing he testified to was that he was, a dapper fellow, dressed real nice, very nicely groomed. He was nicely groomed when he goes to Mary Surratt's house, too, which makes me think that he was doing it all for Mary Surratt. I did good for you, Mary Surratt. I hit it, and then David Harold fucking left him. You just left him? So Lewis Powell goes in there and stabs all these, the Secretary of State and all the Secretary of State people. Like, as he's running out, he stabs another fucking guy, too. And then he hides in the cemetery for 3 days. David Harold was supposed to wait for him. He left his horse there. And I don't know if he grabbed his horse or where Lewis Powell went, but he stayed in the cemetery for 3 days, and I guess nobody went to go check him. When they caught Lewis Powell was when he came out of the cemetery and then went to Mary Surratt's boarding house. They went to Mary Surratt's boarding house. He said he was just a worker bee, but he was manicured and he didn't look like a worker at all. He also had contraband, some fucking conspiratorial assassin contraband on him. The senators killed Caesar. Don't forget that either. That's one little